On the line with us is Professor Thomas DiLorenxo. He is a professor of economics at Loyola University at the Maryland Salinger School of Business, a senior scholar with the Ludwig von Mises Institute, and author of 6 books, including his latest, The Problem with Socialism. And you can tweet him, I guess, generically at Mises, M-I-S-E-S. Professor, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So I've looked through your book, and I'm a little baffled. You're talking about modern Democratic Party progressive policies as socialist, and yes, there are some people who call them that, but those policies are basically in favor of Social Security, Medicare, public roads, public fire departments, public schools. What's your problem with those things?
Well, these things are, generally the worst performing parts of our economy are the ones run by government. Yeah, our country's about
our public roads, our public schools. You want to privatize those? Our fire departments?
Sure. Where is the worst education in America? It's the inner city public schools, the government-run monopoly.
But that's a function of schools being funded by property taxes, which goes back to Reconstruction. This was an effort to keep poor black schools poor, so that they would not produce good students, to prevent economic opportunity. Wouldn't it be better to call for those schools? I mean, public schools in high-income districts are doing just great. They're kicking ass. Wouldn't it be a much more reasonable policy to simply equalize funding of schools all across the country?
Well, there's no link between how much money is spent and educational achievement, and I think anybody with their eyes open
seriously
knows that a lot of the inner city government schools in cities like Baltimore, where I work, are just awful. And the Ku Klux Klan could not have done more harm to black children in America than the government-run school monopoly in the inner city public schools in places like Baltimore and Chicago.
So your solution is to turn these over to Trump University?
What?
Your solution is to turn these over to Trump University or one of Betsy DeVos's for-profit schools?
No, that's a stupid comment. Of course not. Of course not.
Well, what is your solution?
Solution, a magic bullet. There is no magic bullet. But, of course, competition is preferred to monopoly. And, of course, the government-run schools are a monopoly. And monopolies are always bad for most everybody except for the monopolists.
In commerce, I agree with you, but we're talking the education of our children. We're not talking commerce here.
It's even worse. It's even worse that because when they fail, you can ruin a child's life and his economic opportunity forever, and which is what we're doing.
So what's your solution?
Government schools. And so we need more competition, including private schools. And so, the private schools, that's why so many parents are resorting to homeschooling because they don't want to have their kids sitting there in these gun-free zones where all the mass shootings occur.
In those schools with those people, right?
What's that?
In those public schools with those people.
Well, no, I didn't say that. That's you. That's another dumb comment.
Well, Virginia, I mean, after Brown versus Board of Education, for a full year, Virginia shut down the entire state's public schools because they didn't want white kids to have to go to school with black kids.
What does that have to do with anything I'm talking about in my book?
Well, it seems like we're on the edge of the same thing.
Stories.
When you introduce, quote, competition, when you introduce alternatives, what happens is that the wealthy white kids end up in the fancy, more expensive schools, and the poorer black kids end up, by and large, or poorer white kids, if we're talking West Virginia, end up in inferior schools. And whether they're run by government or whether they're run by charter schools. I mean, you find just about the same percentage of underperforming charter schools as you do public schools in the country.
I didn't know you were an educational scholar, but I think
well, I ran a private school for 14 years. I was on the board for 30 years.
Yeah, so you think more educational opportunity is a bad thing for black kids? Is that what you said? That's what you just
What I'm saying is that we need to stop funding public schools through property taxes so that nice communities, upscale white suburban neighborhoods where you've got high property values and those high property taxes that support education have great schools, and poorer schools have crappy schools. We need to stop that. That was put into place for a very specific reason, and not view the public good as an opportunity for profit. That's what I'm saying. You can call that socialism if you want. You can say it's terrible, but...
Well, you have to confront the fact that there are places like Washington, D.C., where they spend maybe $30,000 a year per student or more in the government schools, and the inner city schools in D.C. are very poor, just like the ones in Baltimore, Chicago, and many
because they're
other places.
Dealing with children who are damaged by the poverty of their parents, and the poverty of their parents is a function of structural racism. I mean, you know, if you want to solve the school problem in Washington, D.C., solve the poverty problem. But again, that's not, you know, turning that over to a for-profit corporation. I don't see how that happens.
Of course, that's another big failure of government, isn't it? The poverty programs. We've been spending trillions for, what, 70, 80, 90 years on that, and we still have a poverty problem.
LBJ cut poverty in half in the United States in 8 years.
You what?
LBJ cut poverty in half in the United States in 8 years. If you look at, I was in Canada over the weekend for the wedding of my daughter, and I was in the capital of British Columbia, Victoria. I didn't see a single street person. I didn't see poor people. I didn't, we traveled all over the place. I'm sure that there are some poor people, but it's a country that has what? The government sector is over 30% in Canada. It's approaching 50% in Northern Europe, and in those countries you don't have the kind of poverty that we have in the United States. You know, pregnant women in the United States have a higher risk of dying from their pregnancy than in any other developed country in the world. It's right up there with undeveloped countries in Southern Asia and in Africa and in parts of and in war-torn parts of Central America. That's terrible.
Yeah, if that's true, I'm not sure about these statistics you're throwing out like that. But yeah, it's a good example of the failures of our welfare state, isn't it? And I don't believe for a minute that LBJ cut poverty in half in a few years.
It was 8 years.
Quite miraculous. You should read Charles Murray's old book, Losing Ground, and you show that what he calls latent poverty. That is, people.
You're talking Charles Murray of the bell curve?
People without government assistance actually became worse off. Poverty rate went up after we started.
You're talking Charles Murray, who said that black people were intellectually inferior to white people?
Well, no, I've actually read that book years ago, and he didn't say that. And so your ad hominem comments is not a way to address this issue.
I think Murray and the bell curve have been well discredited, but I still don't hear your solution to. Let's move to Social Security and Medicare. You oppose government. You oppose government socialism. I would grant you that Social Security and Medicare are socialist programs. They run on less than 3% overhead, both of them. If you turn Social Security over to the banks, it's not going to run on 3% overhead. And if you turn Medicare over to the health insurance companies, they're typically running anywhere from 20 to 35% overhead. How is that more efficient?
Well, ask your listeners where they would rather have their money. Would they rather be able to invest it on their own somewhere in the stock market or elsewhere, or would they prefer the 0% return they're going to get if they're under the age of 35 or 40 with Social Security? And that's the bottom line. What is the welfare of Americans who are forced to participate in this program?
So if I'm 25 years old and I've been working since I was 16, and so for 9 years I've been paying into either A, Social Security, or B, into a 401k, and I've got $30,000 in my 401k now, and I'm 25, and I get in a car accident and break my neck. If I'm on Social Security, I have literally an insurance policy against disaster for the rest of my life. Social Security will pay me, Social Security disability income will pay me until the day I die and protect me, provide me with housing, provide me with medical care, and provide me with food. If I've got 25 grand in my 401k, I can live for what, maybe a year or two, and then I starve to death? This is your solution, really?
Well, the average person is not going to get an automobile accident and be disabled for the rest of his life. And in general, we have all kinds of programs to take care of our fellow citizens like that. But in
what
general,
programs?
We're forced to participate in a program that pays us basically less than 1% on our investment in a time when countries around the world are moving in the other direction. England in the late 70s, their system went bankrupted, and they allowed people of a certain age to opt out. Chile did the same thing when their system was bankrupted, in the 80s.
Chile, when Chile did that, when Pinochet did that in Chile, first of all, it took a military coup, and yeah, guys from the Mises Institute and the Chicago School of Economics went down and advised him, and the people were so offended when he privatized Social Security that he took thousands of people out and threw them out of helicopters to kill them. Is that what you're recommending?
Yeah, that's what I'm recommending. That's you know.
And Margaret Thatcher, I mean, seriously?
That's ridiculous. Come on.
Well, that was the blowback. I mean, he privatized Social Security. People were out in the streets, and he started killing protesters. Hello? Oh, he just hung up on me. Amazing. Okay, well, we'll take a break, and we'll pick up your calls. That was Professor Thomas DiLorenxo, professor of economics at Loyola University, and the Maryland Selinger School of Business, and the senior scholar at the Ludwig von Mises Institute. And apparently, you know, not able to handle a debate.